They call it the witching hour, 3 a.m., a time when the veil between our world and whatever lies beyond is supposed to be at its thinnest. Most people sleep right through it. They might toss and turn, maybe have a weird dream about their teeth falling out, but they wake up at 7 a.m. for their coffee, totally oblivious to what was hovering over their bed while they slept. But for Elias Thorne, 3 a.m. wasn't just a time on a clock, it was the start of a countdown. Elias lived in a small, slightly beat-up townhouse in the suburbs of Manchester, though this story could happen in any quiet suburb from Seattle to Sydney. He was a freelance coder, a guy who lived on caffeine and blue light. He wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or vibes. He believed in logic. He believed in code. Until the night of October 14th. At exactly 3:33 a.m., Elias woke up. No nightmare, no sudden noise, just a cold shiver crawling down his spine like a frozen centipede. He looked at his bedroom door. He'd closed it shut before bed. He was a stickler for that. Fire safety, he told himself. But as he watched, the handle didn't turn. There was no click. The door just drifted. It moved with a slow, deliberate smoothness that felt almost mechanical. It stopped exactly 2 inches open. Not an inch, not a wide-open invitation, just a 2-inch sliver of pitch-black hallway staring back at him. Elias stared at that gap for 2 hours until the sun came up. He thought he was losing his mind. He thought it was a draft, but deep down, he knew a draft didn't have a schedule. This was the beginning of a descent into a living nightmare that defied every law of physics Elias had ever programmed. This is the true account of the 333 haunting. The first week, Elias tried to be smart about it. You know the type. The guy who thinks he can out-logic a haunting. It's the house settling, he told his buddy Mark over a beer. Mark just looked at him skeptical. Bro, Mark said, houses settle down. They don't settle open, especially not at the same time every night. That's sketchy as hell. Elias laughed it off. He called it a mechanical anomaly. He checked the hinges. He used a spirit level on the floor. Everything was straight. The house wasn't leaning. The hinges weren't loose. Night 3, Elias stays up. He's got a GoPro mounted on a tripod facing the door. He's got a digital timer in the shot. He's sitting in his bed, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. 3:30, 3:31, 3:32. The air in the room suddenly goes dead. Have you ever been in a room where the sound just disappears? Like someone put noise-canceling headphones over the entire world. That's what Elias felt. At 3:33 a.m., the door creaks, a tiny, high-pitched groan of wood on metal, and then it glides. 2 inches. Elias lunged out of bed, grabbing his heavy mag light. He swung the door open, shouting, expecting a burglar, a prankster, something physical. The hallway was empty. The motion-activated light in the hall hadn't even triggered. Elias checked the footage. On the GoPro, the door moves, but there's a weird visual distortion, like a heat haze right at the edge of the frame. He zoomed in. He stayed up until dawn, frame-stepping through the video. And that's when he saw it. In the 2-inch gap, for just a single frame, there wasn't the hallway. There was something gray, something that looked like a long, wrinkled finger hooked around the edge of the wood. A distorted whispering sound. By the second week, Elias wasn't coding anymore. He was obsessed. He looked total trash, dark circles under his eyes, skin pale as a ghost. His logical brain was starting to fracture. He decided to play hardball. If the door wanted to open 2 inches, he'd make sure it couldn't move a millimeter. He bought a heavy-duty deadbolt, installed it himself. He also pushed a heavy oak dresser in front of the door. We're talking 100 pounds of furniture, plus books. Nobody, not even a pro wrestler, was sliding that door open without a fight. He went to sleep feeling smug. Top that, he muttered to the empty room. 3:33. Elias is jolted awake by a sound that made his blood turn to slush. It wasn't the door opening. It was the sound of the deadbolt screwing itself out of the wall. Scream! Scream! In the moonlight, he watched the metal screws slowly rotate, backing out of the wood as if turned by an invisible screwdriver. They fell to the carpet with soft thuds. Then the dresser, the massive oak dresser, started to slide. It didn't tip, it didn't scratch the floor. It moved silently like it was on ice. It slid exactly far enough to allow the door to open. 2 inches. Elias was hyperventilating now. He grabbed his phone to call Mark, but the screen was dead, not out of battery, just black. He looked at the gap. From the darkness of the hallway, a smell began to drift in. It wasn't the smell of a dusty old house. It was the smell of wet earth and something metallic, like a graveyard after a rainstorm. And then came the voice. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a growl. It was a wet, raspy inhalation. Closer. Elias didn't sleep in the house that night. He ran out the back door in his boxers and spent the night in his car, shivering, staring at the darkened windows of his own home. Most people would have moved out, right? Packed their bags, called a priest, and checked into a Hilton. But Elias was broke. He'd sunk every penny into this townhouse. He needed to know what was happening. He started digging into the local archives. He spent hours in the library, scrolling through old microfilms of the local rags. He found a story from 1974. A woman named Clara Miller lived in that same unit. She'd been a nurse, a quiet woman. One morning, she just didn't show up for her shift. The police found the house perfectly tidy, no sign of a struggle. But they found Clara in her bedroom. She was squeezed into the gap behind her wardrobe, a space barely 3 inches wide. She had died of fright. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the door. The police report mentioned a peculiar detail. Every clock in the house had stopped at exactly 3:33. Elias felt a cold sweat break out. He kept reading. Before Clara, there was a man in the 1950s, a veteran. He'd complained to neighbors about the man in the gap. They thought it was PTSD. He ended up taking a leap off the local bridge. The common thread, they all started mentioning the door. They all said it began with 2 inches. Elias realized he wasn't being haunted by a ghost. He was being hunted by a pattern. It's now week 3. Elias is a shell of a human being. He stopped going outside. He feels like if he leaves the house for too long, the thing will follow him. He decides he's done being the victim. He's going to see what's on the other side of that door. He buys an industrial thermal camera. If this thing has a heat signature, he's going to catch it. He also grabs a kitchen knife, which, let's be real, is like bringing a toothpick to a gunfight, but it gave him a sense of security. The night was oppressive. A storm was rolling in, the kind of thunder that rattles your teeth. 3:30. Elias is standing in the middle of his room, thermal camera aimed at the door. The screen shows the room in shades of blue and purple. The door is a solid block of navy blue. 3:32. The temperature in the room drops. He can see his own breath on the thermal, a cloud of bright orange fading into yellow. 3:33. The door creaks, a tiny high-pitched groan of wood on metal, and then it glides. 2 inches. Elias lunged out of bed, grabbing his heavy maglite. He swung the door open, shouting, expecting a burglar, a prankster, something physical. On the thermal screen, he saw something that made his heart stop. A hand, bright, burning white, meaning it's incredibly hot, reach around the edge of the door. But it's not a human hand. The fingers are too long. They have too many joints. They look like pale, fleshy spiders. The hand grips the edge of the door and pulls it those 2 inches. Elias should have run. He should have jumped out the window, but he was paralyzed by a sick, twisted curiosity. He walked towards the door. He leaned his face towards the 2-inch gap. The sound of heavy, wet breathing, very close to the microphone. He peered through. He didn't see the hallway. He didn't see his coat rack or the bathroom door. He saw a forest, a dead, gray forest under a sky that was the color of a bruised lung. And standing right there, inches from his face, was a figure, It was impossibly tall, wearing what looked like a tattered funeral shroud. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where a face should be, with a vertical slit running down the middle. The slit opened. "You're late," the thing whispered. Elias screamed, slamming his weight against the door. But the door didn't budge. It was like hitting a concrete wall. Those 2 inches were held firm by a force that didn't belong to our world. Suddenly, a long, thin finger poked through the gap. It touched Elias's forehead. It was searing hot. The next morning, Elias woke up on the floor. He had a blister on his forehead the size of a coin. He didn't try to lock the door anymore. He didn't try to film it. He knew the rules now. The door opens 2 inches to let the outside in, and every night that gap was getting just a little bit harder. You'd think after a disappearance like Elias Thorne's, the police would have cordoned off that townhouse like a nuclear blast zone. But the world doesn't work like that. The files got buried under a pile of unsolved paperwork. The landlord, a guy who cared more about his bottom line than a potential interdimensional rift, did a quick landlord special. A fresh coat of white paint, some new carpet to hide the scorch marks, and put it back on the market. Enter Dave and Sarah. Dave was a graphic designer from East London, and Sarah was a nurse from Toronto. They were that couple, always on TikTok, always posting about their new chapter. They got the place for a steal. They thought they'd hit the jackpot. "It's got character," Sarah told her mom over FaceTime, panning the camera around the bedroom. "A bit of a weird vibe in the hallway, but the rent is dead-ass half of what we were paying in Shoreditch." But character is just another word for baggage, and this house had enough baggage to fill a Boeing 747. For the first 3 nights, nothing happened. Dave and Sarah were in that honeymoon phase where you don't notice the cold drafts or the way the shadows seem to linger a bit too long in the corners. Then came night 4. A sudden, sharp thud, followed by the sound of a dog whimpering. Dave woke up, not because of a noise, but because of the silence. It was that same noise-canceling silence Elias had felt, the kind of silence that feels like someone is holding their hand over your mouth. He looked at the door. It was open, exactly 2 inches. "Sarah," he whispered, "did you get up?" No answer. Sarah was dead to the world, her breathing rhythmic and heavy. Dave got out of bed, his feet hitting the cold floorboards. He walked to the door, his hand trembling. He reached for the handle, intending to shut it, but as his fingers got within an inch of the wood, he felt a blast of heat. Not heater heat, hell heat, the kind of heat that smells like ozone and burning hair. He pulled his hand back, gasping. He looked through the gap. He didn't see the gray forest Elias had seen. He saw something worse. He saw his own hallway, but it looked wrong. The walls were dripping, not with water, but with something black and viscous like old motor oil. And standing at the end of the hall, near the stairs, was a man. He was wearing Elias Thorne's favorite hoodie, but the man was standing at an angle that shouldn't be possible. His body was tilted 45 degrees to the side. His neck snapped so his head rested on his shoulder. It was Elias, or what was left of him. The entity that looked like Elias raised a hand. It pointed a long, charred finger at the 2-inch gap. "Don't let it close," the thing croaked. Dave didn't tell Sarah. He didn't want to sound like he was tripping. He convinced himself it was a vivid dream, sleep paralysis maybe. But then the 2-inch rule started spreading. It wasn't just the bedroom door anymore. He'd go to the kitchen to make coffee, and the pantry door would be open, 2 inches. He'd get into his car to drive to work, and the glove box would be popped, 2 inches. He even found his laptop screen tilted at an exact 2-inch angle every time he left the room. Dave started carrying a tape measure. He became obsessed. He'd spend hours measuring gaps around the house. 2 inches, Always, exactly. He stopped going to work. He stopped posting on social media. His new chapter was turning into a horror anthology. Sarah started to notice. "Dave, you're acting sketchy as hell, bruv. You're staring at the doors like they're gonna grow teeth. Talk to me." Dave just looked at her, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. "It's the gap, Sarah. It's a measurement. It's a coordinate. It's not just a door. It's a mouth." Sarah thought he was having a psychotic break. She called a doctor. She called his parents. But while she was on the phone in the living room, Dave was in the bedroom, doing something he'd sworn he'd never do. He was talking back to the gap. "What do you want?" Dave whispered, leaning his face toward the sliver of darkness at 3:33 a.m. The response didn't come from the hallway. It came from inside his own head. "The world is too wide," the voice said. It sounded like 1,000 dead leaves skittering across pavement. 2 inches is all we need to get through. 2 inches is the width of a human heart. 2 inches is the space between life and us. Dave realized then that Elias Thorne hadn't just disappeared, he'd been harvested. See, this thing, let's call it the threshold man, doesn't just kill you, it compresses you. It takes everything that makes you a 3-dimensional being, your memories, your mass, your soul, and it folds it down until you can fit through that 2-inch gap. Dave found Elias's old journal. Elias had hidden it behind a loose floorboard in the closet. The last entry was written in a hand so shaky it was barely legible. It said, "It's a geometry of pain. They aren't from another planet. They're from the in-between. They live in the shadows of the things we build. Every time we leave a door ajar, we give them a bridge. 3:33 isn't the time, it's the thickness of the veil." Dave looked at the tape measure in his hand. He realized that the gap in the bedroom door was no longer 2 inches. He measured it, 2.5 inches. It was growing. A deep, resonant thumb sound followed by the sound of wood splintering very slowly. Part 9. The Breach. The final night for Dave and Sarah wasn't quiet. It wasn't mysterious. It was a straight-up demolition of reality. At 3:33 a.m., the house began to groan. Sarah woke up to the sound of Dave screaming. She turned on the bedside lamp, but the light didn't fill the room. It only illuminated a small circle around the bed. Outside that circle, the darkness was absolute. "Dave!" she yelled. Dave was standing at the bedroom door, but he wasn't pulling it shut. He was being pulled into it. The door was now open 4 inches, 5, 6, but it wasn't swinging on its hinges. The wood itself was stretching. The door frame was widening like a mouth. From the darkness of the hallway, dozens of those long, pale, multi-jointed fingers reached in. They hooked into Dave's skin, into his shoulders, his cheeks, his eyes. "Dave, run!" Dave gasped, but as he spoke, his voice sounded thin, tinny, like it was coming from a radio miles away. Sarah lunged for him, grabbing his waist. She pulled with everything she had. She was a nurse, she was strong, but pulling Dave was like trying to pull a shadow. He felt weightless. She looked at his face and let out a scream that probably echoed 3 blocks away. Dave's face was flattening. His nose was sinking into his skull. His eyes were migrating to the sides of his head. He was becoming a 2-dimensional image of himself. "Let go, Sarah," the image Dave whispered. "It's actually peaceful in the fold." With a sudden, sickening pop, the sound of a vacuum seal breaking, Dave was sucked through the gap. The door slammed shut, but not all the way. It stopped, exactly 2 inches. Part 10. The Linger. Sarah didn't stay. She didn't even grab her shoes. She ran out of that house and didn't stop until she found a police cruiser. But here's the kicker, the part that'll keep you awake tonight. When the police went back to the house, Dave was gone, just like Elias. no blood, no signs of a struggle. But Sarah, she's not the same. She moved back to Toronto, but she lives in a house with no doors. She had them all removed, every single one. She sleeps in a room with open archways because she can't handle the sight of a door frame. But she told me something when I interviewed her for this account, something that makes my skin crawl every time I look at my own bedroom door. She said she was sitting in her new living room, middle of the day, sun shining bright. She looked down on her own shadow on the floor. She noticed that her shadow didn't move when she did. She watched as her shadow slowly detached itself from her feet. The shadow hand reached out and touched the shadow of the wall. And in the shadow world, on the shadow wall, a shadow door appeared, and it opened exactly 2 inches. You see, once you've seen the gap never stops looking at you. It doesn't matter if you're in a townhouse in Manchester or a high-rise in New York. The threshold man doesn't need a physical door. He just needs you to know he's there. So, I have to ask you, as you're sitting there listening to this, is your door shut? Are you sure? Go check. I'll wait. But if you get there and you see that 2-inch sliver of darkness staring back at you, don't look through. Don't listen. And for the love of God, don't let him fold you. 2 inches.